The room was quiet, almost too quiet, as the faint hum of the outside world filtered in through the cracked window. It was a modest space, nothing grand, but it was cozy in its simplicity. A slight breeze stirred the curtains, the movement soft and delicate as the sunlight barely kissed the edges of the room. There was something almost peaceful about the moment, yet there was an undercurrent of tension in the air, an invisible weight that neither of the two people in the room could shake. Lily stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, clutching the photograph in her hands like it was the most fragile thing in the world. The picture, yellowed with age and edges curled from time, had been passed down to her by her mother. It wasn't much, just a simple family photo. A family she never got the chance to truly know. The man in the photo, her father, was nothing more than a stranger to her. In fact, her memories of him were vague at best, like a dream that faded the more she tried to grasp it. Her mother had always spoken of him with a mixture of love and sorrow, of fondness and regret, but never once had she seen him, not since she was just a child. And now, standing in this room, Lily was about to confront a man who, in a way, held the key to the mystery that had been her life. She had been told stories, of course, stories of her father's life before everything had changed. He was someone important, someone who had once made a difference in the world. A successful businessman, an influential figure her mother had told her so many times that he was once someone who had meant the world to her. But those stories were always followed by the same words, heavy with regret. Things didn't turn out as we hoped. They were the kind of stories that hinted at a grand narrative, one full of promise and potential, but ultimately broken by the harshness of life. And then there was the photo. The only connection Lily had to a man she was told was her father. Her mother had kept it hidden away for years. Lily knew the story behind the picture, but there were always questions. Why had her mother never spoken of him after she was a child? What had happened that led to his absence from her life? These questions had gnawed at her for as long as she could remember, and now, as she stood in the presence of Alexander, the young billionaire, she felt a strange compulsion to find answers. Alexander stood across the room, his back straight, his eyes taking in the surroundings with a dispassionate gaze. He exuded an air of confidence, of power. His presence seemed to command the space, and Lily couldn't help but feel the contrast between them. He was everything she wasn't: wealthy, successful, and influential. His tailored suit, sharp features, and cool, calculated demeanor made him seem untouchable. He was a man who had the world at his feet. And yet, in this room, in this moment, Lily felt as though the tables had turned. She was the one in control of the situation. She was the one holding the photograph, the one with the questions that could unravel everything. Her voice broke the silence, small but firm, carrying with it the weight of years of uncertainty. "Do you know him?" she asked, her eyes locked on Alexander's. She didn't flinch, even though her heart was racing. Her hands trembled slightly as she held out the photo, as if the very act of showing it to him might somehow reveal something she wasn't ready to know. The words hung in the air, filled with both hope and fear. Alexander didn't immediately respond. Instead, his eyes shifted to the photograph in her hands. There was a momentary flicker of something: surprise? Recognition? It was hard to say, but it was enough to make Lily's stomach tighten. She waited, her breath caught in her throat, her pulse hammering in her ears. The billionaire's reaction was crucial. It would tell her everything she needed to know. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the photo. He was a man used to having everything under control, used to being the one who dictated the terms of any interaction. But now, as he looked at the photograph, Lily could see something shift in his demeanor. The steely composure he usually carried so effortlessly seemed to waver for the briefest of moments. "My mom said he was my dad," Lily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were simple, but the weight they carried was immense. She was offering a piece of herself, a piece of her identity, to this man who stood before her. And in return, she was hoping for an answer a definitive answer. Who was this man? What had happened between him and her mother? Alexander took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the photograph before finally reaching out to take it from her. His touch was gentle, deliberate, as though he were handling something incredibly delicate. For a moment, he just stared at the picture, studying it with a furrowed brow. The room seemed to grow even quieter, if that was possible, as the tension between them mounted. Lily watched him, her heart in her throat. His expression was unreadable, his thoughts concealed behind a mask of controlled indifference. Yet, despite the calm exterior, she could feel the storm brewing within him. His eyes darted from the photo to her face, then back to the photo again. It was as if he were searching for something, anything that would explain the strange, unexpected appearance of this photograph in his life. He didn't speak right away. Instead, there was a long silence, thick with unspoken words. Finally, he broke the stillness, his voice low and guarded. "I don't know who he is," he said, his tone carrying an edge of uncertainty. It wasn't what Lily had expected to hear, but she wasn't sure why it felt so heavy. She had braced herself for this moment, yet hearing those words, words that contradicted everything she had been told, shook her to her core. Lily didn't know how to respond. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. She had no idea what to say next, or what she was even hoping for. But there was one thing she was certain of. This wasn't just a coincidence. There was more to this photo, more to this man than either of them understood, and she was determined to uncover it. Part 2. The weight of Alexander's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Lily's fingers tightened around the photograph, the edges digging into her skin as if the picture might slip away and vanish into thin air if she didn't hold on tightly. She had expected uncertainty, maybe even denial, but the lack of recognition stung in a way she hadn't anticipated. This man, standing just a few feet away, was supposed to hold the answers to the questions that had plagued her for years. Instead, he looked as though the very idea of a connection to her family was as foreign to him as a distant memory, one he could not, or would not, recall. Lily's mind raced. Could her mother have been mistaken, or had she lied to her all these years? No, that didn't seem right. Her mother had been adamant about her father's identity, always speaking of him with a certain wistfulness, a longing that bordered on sadness. Yet now, here was this man, so seemingly disconnected from everything she thought she knew. I don't understand," Lily stammered, her voice breaking through the silence that had settled over them. "You're telling me you don't recognize him? This man who's supposed to be my father?" She took a step forward, desperation creeping into her tone. She was no longer just asking for answers, she was demanding them, as though by sheer force of will she could drag the truth from him. Alexander glanced up at her then, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be struggling internally, torn between wanting to tell her something, anything, and holding on to the composure that was so ingrained in his persona. For a moment, he appeared almost human, vulnerable in a way Lily had not expected. But just as quickly, the mask returned. He took a slow, deliberate breath, as though bracing himself for what he might have to say next. "Lily, I don't know what your mother has told you, but I can assure you, I don't know that man," he said, his voice still calm, but there was an undercurrent of something darker lurking beneath the surface. "I don't know who he is, and I don't know why this picture is so important to you." His words were simple, but they had the power to tear through everything she thought she understood. How could he not know? How could he stand there, looking at her so intently, and not recognize the man in the photograph, someone who had been a part of her life for as long as she could remember? Lily's chest tightened. This wasn't the answer she had hoped for. It was one thing to hear a vague dismissal, to feel the cold brush of indifference, but to hear those words, spoken with such finality, it felt like a slap to the face. The photograph, her connection to the past, was meaningless to him. She was meaningless to him. Her mind spun. She had come to him with the belief that he held the answers to all her questions, but now, With those words hanging in the air, she wondered if the answers would ever come. Maybe she had been wrong to think that anyone could hold the key to her past. Maybe it wasn't about finding answers at all. It was about forging her own path forward, free from the ties of a past she could never fully grasp. Lily shook her head, as if to clear the fog that had descended upon her thoughts. She wasn't going to let herself get lost in this moment, not yet. She still needed to understand. There had to be something she was missing, some small detail that she hadn't noticed before. And if Alexander couldn't or wouldn't help her, she would find another way. She would find the truth on her own. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice steady now, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. "You can't possibly tell me that you don't know who he is. If there's any chance you do, I need to know. I need to understand." For the first time, Alexander seemed taken aback. His gaze faltered for a split second, a crack in his otherwise unyielding facade. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who seemed so determined, so resolute. But the determination in Lily's eyes, the urgency in her voice, made him reconsider his approach. She wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to leave until she got answers. "I'm telling you the truth," he replied, his voice more firm now, though there was a hint of frustration creeping into his tone. "I don't know him, but that doesn't mean you can't find out who he is. There are people who might know people who can help." Lily's brow furrowed as she processed his words. People who might know? Who? And why hadn't anyone else told her about them before? Why had her mother never mentioned anyone who might hold answers? The questions swirled in her mind, faster and faster, until it felt like her thoughts were spinning out of control. Her pulse quickened. "You think it's that simple?" she asked, her voice rising now, the frustration creeping into her words. "You think I can just walk out of here and go find someone else to give me the answers I've been looking for? That's not how it works. That's not how it ever worked for me." Her grip on the photograph tightened once again as she fought to hold herself together, to keep from letting the overwhelming sense of helplessness take over. Alexander watched her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the tension between them seemed to dissipate, replaced by a silence that felt almost too intimate. They were two people, standing in the same room, each bearing the weight of their own unspoken truths. But there was a bridge between them, a gap they couldn't cross. Lily was the first to break the silence, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "I don't know who else to turn to," she whispered. "I thought maybe you could help me. I thought maybe you knew something." For a brief moment, Alexander considered her words. There was something about the rawness in her voice, the vulnerability beneath her anger, that reached him. He had always been someone who kept his emotions tightly locked away, but in this moment, it felt as though he was seeing something that had always been hidden from him, a glimpse into a world he didn't understand. "I don't know the answers you're looking for," he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "But I can help you find them. I'll help you figure this out." Lily's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering behind them. She didn't fully trust him, not yet, but there was something in his tone that made her believe he wasn't lying. Maybe, just maybe, he could offer the help she so desperately needed. Part 3. Lily stood still, her gaze fixed on Alexander, the silence between them stretching out like a chasm. She wasn't sure what she expected to hear from him anymore. The hope she had walked in with, naive and fragile, was beginning to crack, and in its place was a growing sense of doubt. But even amidst the swirling uncertainty, there was something else. A flicker of something deeper, maybe hope, maybe desperation, that pushed her to continue. She clenched her fists at her sides, determined not to let herself fall apart. "I don't know why I thought you could help me," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Alexander to hear. The words were bitter, laced with frustration. She didn't want to feel like this, like a person who had reached out only to be turned away. But that was the reality of her life. She had always had to fend for herself, always had to fight for every scrap of truth she could uncover. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Your father will come back one day, Lily. I promise you." Those words had been a promise, a whisper of comfort that had soothed her as a child, but they had never felt real. Now, standing here with a man who didn't even recognize the man in the photograph, she felt foolish for ever believing in that promise. But the photo, it was real. The man in the photograph, the one with the sharp jawline and the intense eyes, was a part of her. He had to be. There had to be something, some link, some secret truth buried beneath the surface that could explain everything. And maybe Alexander didn't have all the answers, but he was the only lead she had. "I'm sorry," Alexander said, his voice breaking through the storm of her thoughts. He stepped closer, though there was hesitation in his movements. He wasn't sure how to handle this. He wasn't used to people pressing him for answers, especially not answers he didn't have. "I know this isn't easy for you, but I truly don't know who he is, and I don't know why your mother never told you more about him." Lily took a shaky breath. Her shoulders slumped, and for the briefest of moments, the anger that had been boiling inside her gave way to something else, something far more vulnerable. "I don't know who to trust anymore," she admitted, her voice small. "I don't know if I should believe her, or believe you, or if I should just let it all go." The words felt like a confession. A weight lifted from her chest as she allowed herself to speak the truth that she had buried for so long. She had always trusted her mother, believed in her words without question. But now, standing here with the evidence in front of her, the photograph and the billionaire's denial, she felt like she was losing her grip on everything she thought she knew. Alexander studied her for a long moment, his eyes softening slightly. It was rare for him to see someone so raw, so open, and it made him uncomfortable. He wasn't sure how to respond to the vulnerability she was showing. His life had been so carefully curated, every emotion kept in check, every relationship measured and controlled. He didn't know how to be anything else, how to give someone the answers they were looking for when he didn't even have them himself. Still, he felt the need to say something, anything that could ease the tension between them. "I can help you find the answers," he said, his voice steady but laced with an unfamiliar sincerity. "I can help you track down the people who might know more about your father. It's not going to be easy, but I can help." Lily stared at him, unsure whether to believe him or not. There was something in his voice, something in the way he spoke, that made her want to trust him, but she had been burned by too many empty promises to let herself fall for another one. Still, a part of her, a small, hopeful part, wanted to believe that this time things might be different. "How?" she asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and skepticism. "How can you help me? You said you didn't know who he was." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I have resources, people who know things, people who can dig deeper into your father's past. I don't know if it will lead us anywhere, but it's a start. It's better than sitting here doing nothing." Lily's heart skipped a beat. It was the first real offer of help she had gotten in all this time, and despite her skepticism, she couldn't ignore the pull of the possibility. If anyone could find something, it might be Alexander. He had the money, the connections, and the power to uncover things that ordinary people like her could never hope to find. But there was a catch. There was always a catch when it came to people like him. She had heard enough stories about men like Alexander, people who used their power for their own ends, who promised the world only to take it all back when it suited them. "I don't know," she began, her voice hesitant. "I don't know if I can trust you. You're a billionaire. You live in a world I don't understand, and I don't know if you have the right reasons for helping me." The words were out before she could stop them, but they were the truth. Lily had spent so long trying to figure out the world she lived in, struggling to survive, and now, standing before this man, she wasn't sure what was real anymore. Was he helping her because he genuinely cared? Or was he just playing some game, using her need for answers to manipulate her in ways she couldn't even begin to comprehend? Alexander's face remained calm, his features impassive as always. But there was something in his eyes, something that flickered just beneath the surface. It wasn't the typical coldness she had seen in him before. It was a flash of something else, regret? Guilt? It was hard to tell. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away," he said quietly, his voice softer now. "I'm just offering to help. And if you don't want it, that's fine. But you won't get any closer to finding your father on your own, not without some kind of help." Lily took a step back, considering his words. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with unspoken tension. She wanted to believe him, to believe that someone in this world, someone with power and influence, might actually be able to help her. But there was so much at stake, so much she didn't know. She could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her, the pull of both possibilities, trusting him or walking away. Both options felt like a leap into the unknown. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice steady but uncertain. "I'll think about what you said, but I need time." Alexander didn't argue. He nodded, understanding the gravity of the decision she faced. For a moment, the two of them just stood there in silence, the air between them charged with the tension of unspoken words. Part 4. Lily didn't leave immediately. The weight of the decision was too much for her to carry alone, and despite the hurt she felt from Alexander's words, she couldn't walk away without giving herself a chance. A chance at the truth, even if it meant putting her trust in a man she didn't fully understand. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but the thought of returning to the life she had before, one where the questions about her father remained unanswered, was unbearable. "I need to know more," she said quietly, almost to herself. She didn't know if she was speaking to Alexander or to the ghosts of her past, but the words left her lips with a force she couldn't ignore. "I need to know what happened. Why did my mother keep this from me? And why did you not recognize him?" Alexander, still standing a few feet away, didn't respond right away. He simply observed her, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He had always been a man who calculated every move, who saw the world through a lens of business deals and calculated risks. But Lily was different. She was raw, her emotions so palpable that they made him question his own motivations. Why had he offered to help her in the first place? Was it simply because he felt guilty, or was there something more? He wasn't sure, but as the silence stretched between them, he realized that he needed to say something, something to bridge the gap, to make her feel like she wasn't alone in this. "I don't know why your mother kept this from you," he said, his voice low. "But I do know that there are secrets in every family, things people don't want to face, don't want to acknowledge. Maybe your mother thought it was better that you didn't know." Lily flinched at his words. It was as though he had read her mind, as though he knew exactly what she was feeling. Her mother's silence, the way she had kept everything locked away behind closed doors, had always left her with more questions than answers. And now, standing here, the harsh reality that she might never get the answers she longed for was slowly sinking in. She had spent so many years holding on to the hope that one day everything would be explained. But now she wasn't so sure. "I don't want to believe that," Lily replied, her voice breaking slightly. She wiped away a stray tear, her emotions bubbling to the surface despite her best efforts to keep them under control. "I don't want to believe that she kept me in the dark on purpose. I don't know what's worse, believing that she lied to me, or that she was protecting me from something I didn't even know existed." The vulnerability in her voice caught Alexander off guard. He had always seen himself as the one with control, the one who could navigate any situation with ease. But here, in this moment, he was out of his depth. He had never had to confront something so raw, so real. It made him uncomfortable, but it also made him feel something he hadn't in a long time: sympathy, genuine sympathy. "I can't imagine what that must feel like," Alexander said, his tone softer now. "But I'm here to help you find the truth, whatever it takes." Lily met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for any sign that he was telling the truth. There was something in his expression, something that seemed almost human. It was a vulnerability she hadn't seen before, not in the stoic businessman who always seemed to have everything under control. In that moment, Alexander wasn't the billionaire she had first thought him to be. He was just a man who might be as lost as she was, trying to make sense of a situation neither of them fully understood. "I don't know if I can trust you," Lily said, her voice low but resolute. "But I don't have any other choice, do I?" Alexander shook his head slowly, his eyes softening as he took a step closer to her. "No, you don't have any other choice. But I won't let you do this alone. I'll help you find the answers, Lily, I promise." For the first time, Lily felt the weight of his promise. It wasn't just a shallow reassurance. There was something in the way he said it, something that told her he was more than just a businessman trying to make a deal. This was personal for him, too, though she couldn't yet understand why. She nodded slowly, her decision made. If she wanted the truth, she had to take the first step, even if it was a leap into the unknown. And maybe, just maybe, Alexander could be the bridge she needed to finally uncover the story that had haunted her all her life. "I'll hold you to that promise," she said, her voice steady now but still tinged with uncertainty. "But if you're lying to me, if you're using me for something, I'll make sure you regret it." Alexander didn't flinch at her words. He had expected her to be wary, and he respected her for it. If their paths were going to cross, if they were going to work together, trust had to be earned. He understood that. "You don't have to worry about that," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not here to manipulate you, Lily. I'm here to help you. That's all." The two of them stood there in the dimly lit room, an unspoken understanding between them. There was still so much to be uncovered, so many questions left unanswered, but for the first time, Lily felt like she was no longer facing this battle alone. Part 5. The next few days passed in a blur for Lily. Every time she tried to make sense of the situation, of the promise Alexander had made, her mind seemed to race in every direction, tangled in questions with no easy answers. She had agreed to trust him for now, but that didn't mean she wasn't constantly second-guessing herself. What had she gotten herself into? Was it really possible that Alexander, a man with so much power and so many resources, was genuinely interested in helping her find her father? Or was this all just another elaborate game, another way for him to use her as a pawn in some unseen power play? Lily spent long hours pacing the apartment, her thoughts spiraling, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. It wasn't that she didn't want to believe him. It wasn't that she didn't want the truth. She had spent years longing for it, hoping for it. But trusting someone, trusting anyone, had never been easy for her. Trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability, in her experience, meant getting hurt. Her mother's warnings echoed in her ears. "People like him are dangerous, Lily. They don't care about the things that matter. They care about power, about control." Those words had always been a cautionary tale in her mind, one she had lived by for as long as she could remember. But now, standing on the precipice of something bigger, something more uncertain than she had ever faced, those warnings felt distant. Would they hold any weight if she found herself needing Alexander's help to piece together the fragmented story of her life? The following morning, Lily received a message from Alexander. It was short, to the point. "Meet me at my office. We're starting the search today." Her heart skipped a beat. The moment of truth was finally here. She had been waiting for this. Yet, now that it was happening, the nerves came rushing in. She couldn't keep herself from questioning everything. Was she really ready for this? Was she prepared for what they might uncover? But there was no turning back now. The decision had been made. She left her apartment and made her way to Alexander's office, her thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty. The building where his office was located was a towering structure of glass and steel, a testament to the kind of power and influence he wielded. She had only been inside once, and even then it had been a brief and impersonal encounter. The luxury and opulence of the space made her feel like an outsider, someone who didn't belong. The receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile as she entered the lobby, directing her to the elevator. The ride up felt like an eternity, the walls of the elevator reflecting the cold, sterile atmosphere of the building. The higher they ascended, the more Lily felt the weight of the decision she had made pressing down on her chest. When the doors finally opened, she was led into a large, open office space where Alexander was waiting. His office was sleek and modern, filled with expensive furniture and decor that spoke volumes about his wealth and taste. He stood by the window, looking out over the city as if deep in thought. When he turned to face her, there was a flicker of something determination, resolve, in his eyes. "Lily," he said, his voice calm but steady. "Thanks for coming." She nodded, trying to shake the nervousness that had settled in her stomach. She couldn't show him that she was uncertain, not now. She had to stand firm, had to let him know that she was committed to finding the truth, no matter what it took. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady, though she could feel her pulse quickening. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly, and he motioned for her to sit at the desk across from him. He walked over to a file cabinet and pulled out a folder. The contents inside were thick documents, papers, photographs, all neatly organized. He placed the folder in front of her, his fingers briefly brushing the edges as he slid it toward her. "We start with what we know," he said, his tone pragmatic. "We know your father's name from the photograph. We know that he was once involved in some high-profile business dealings. And we know that he disappeared from your life and from the public eye under mysterious circumstances." Lily felt her throat tighten as she opened the folder. The first photograph she saw was a grainy image of a man, older than the one in the picture she had at home, but unmistakably the same person. She stared at it for a long moment, taking in every detail, as if the face might hold the answers she had been searching for. "This is him," she whispered, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the outline of the photo. "This is my father." Alexander leaned forward, watching her closely. "His name is Samuel Turner," he said. "He was a successful businessman in the early 2000s, but after a series of bad investments and personal controversies, he disappeared. No one knows where he went or what happened to him, but I have people who can help us trace his movements." Lily felt a lump form in her throat. Samuel Turner. Her father's name was right there in black and white, staring back at her. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the first piece of a puzzle she wasn't sure she was ready to solve. Each new detail only deepened the mystery, the questions swirling in her mind faster than she could keep up. She looked up at Alexander, trying to keep her voice steady. "How do we find him? How do we track him down after all this time?" Alexander leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled together as he considered her question. "There are people who know things, private investigators, old contacts of your father's who might still be around. It won't be easy, but we'll start by digging into his past. Every lead, every connection, no matter how small, could bring us closer to the truth." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "And if we find him, what then? What do we do with the truth?" Alexander met her gaze, his eyes unflinching. "That's something only you can decide, but we'll help you find it." Part 6. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Lily found herself in an unfamiliar world, one where secrets were uncovered with every phone call, every meeting, every document that crossed her desk. She had never imagined that the search for her father would pull her so deep into a maze of corporate espionage, shadowy figures, and half-forgotten rumors. She wasn't sure whether she was uncovering the past or creating a new mystery entirely. But one thing was clear. The more she discovered, the more tangled everything became. Alexander's team of investigators had started digging into Samuel Turner's past, sifting through financial records, old news articles, and any lead they could get their hands on. They had made contact with a few of his old business partners, people who had once trusted him, worked alongside him, and had once considered him a friend. But as soon as the topic of Samuel Turner was brought up, Those conversations became evasive. No one seemed to know where he had gone or why he had disappeared, and no one seemed eager to talk about it. But there was one thing that caught Lily's attention, a name that kept coming up in the records. A woman named Sarah Brooks. According to the documents, she had been closely involved with Samuel in the years before his disappearance. But when Lily dug deeper, she found something strange. Sarah Brooks wasn't just a business associate. She was someone with ties to a number of high-profile individuals, people who, from the outside, seemed untouchable. The more Lily learned about her, the more questions she had. Sarah Brooks. Lily repeated the name to herself, her fingers tracing the information on her computer screen. Why does she keep popping up? Alexander stood behind her, his presence looming over her as she scrolled through the information. He was quieter than usual, his usual confidence subdued, as if he were considering something. "She's been a part of Samuel's life for a long time," he said, his voice measured. "But there's something off about her story. We've hit a dead end with her, but she might be the key to finding out what really happened." Lily turned to look at him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean, off about her story? Why is she important?" Alexander's gaze hardened slightly. "Because Sarah Brooks isn't who she says she is. I've been doing some background checks. She's connected to people who've been involved in shady business dealings, and there are rumors about her being part of a much bigger picture than anyone realizes." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What kind of picture?" Alexander didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed her a folder, one that was more recent than the others. "I've been trying to find out more about her. This might answer some of your questions." His licks. Lily opened the folder cautiously, her pulse racing as she flipped through the pages. The documents inside were not what she had expected. There were photographs, some of Sarah with Samuel, others with people she didn't recognize. But what stood out the most was a series of cryptic letters, handwritten and dated from several years ago. They seemed to be written between Samuel and Sarah, but their contents were vague and unsettling. Words like dangerous, escape, and plan jumped out at her, sending a chill down her spine. "Why would they be talking like this?" Lily whispered, more to herself than to Alexander. "I don't know," Alexander replied. "But I think they knew something was coming. I think Samuel was involved in something much bigger than just business, and I think Sarah Brooks was a part of it." Lily sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. She had known that her father's disappearance wasn't a simple matter, but this was something else entirely. There were pieces here that didn't fit, and the more she looked, the more the pieces seemed to be part of something much darker than she had imagined. Was her father involved in something criminal? Was Sarah Brooks part of that world? And what did all of this mean for her? "Do you think Sarah knows where my father is?" Lily asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know," Alexander said, his tone grim. "But we need to find her. She's the only lead we've got left." Lily nodded, her resolve strengthening. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. She wasn't going to let her father's story remain a mystery. No matter how dangerous it got, she had to find the truth. The next step was clear: find Sarah Brooks. But that was easier said than done. The woman seemed to be a ghost, always a step ahead, always just out of reach. But Lily wasn't going to stop. She couldn't stop. She had waited too long to find her father, to piece together the fragmented story of her past. She wasn't going to let fear or uncertainty stand in her way now. "Where do we start?" Lily asked, her eyes meeting Alexander's. Alexander hesitated for a moment before answering. "I have a few contacts who might know how to find her, but we'll have to move quickly. If she's as involved as I think she is, she's going to be hard to track down." Lily didn't flinch. She had already made up her mind. "Then let's move quickly. I don't want to waste any more time." Part 7. The search for Sarah Brooks didn't take long to ramp up. Within hours of Alexander making his calls, they had gathered a few leads. The more they dug, the more elusive she seemed to become. It was like she knew they were coming. Every time they thought they had found a trace of her, an address, a phone number, and a potential meeting, she slipped away into the shadows again. It was maddening. Lily couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as they pushed forward. This wasn't just about her father anymore. The more they uncovered, the more it seemed like there was an entire world hidden beneath the surface, a world filled with dangerous players and unsolved mysteries. She had never imagined that her quest for answers would drag her so deep into a web of lies and deceit. It wasn't long before Alexander found a lead that they couldn't ignore. It was a name someone who had once worked closely with Sarah Brooks years ago, before her rise into the world of corporate deals and hidden connections. The man's name was Vincent Hayes, and according to the records, he had disappeared shortly after Sarah had left the public eye. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Vincent Hayes. Lily repeated the name to herself as she looked at the dossier Alexander had handed her. This is the guy who can lead us to her? He might, Alexander said, his tone cautious. He was close to Sarah, too close for comfort, from what I understand, but he hasn't been seen in years. Last known location, a small town in upstate New York. I've already made contact with a few of my people there. They're going to track him down. Lily didn't respond immediately. Her mind was still processing the weight of everything they were uncovering. Every new piece of information felt like a puzzle piece falling into place. But with each new piece came a new set of questions. Who was Sarah Brooks really? And why had she been so intertwined with her father's life and now with Lily's life as well? If he's so important, why has no one heard from him in so long? Lily asked, her eyes narrowed in thought. What does he know about Sarah that no one else does? Alexander hesitated before answering. That's the million-dollar question. I don't know what he knows, but if he can help us find Sarah, we need to track him down. We're running out of time. Lily's pulse quickened at the thought. Time. They had already spent so much of it, and yet it felt like they were only scratching the surface. If there was a chance, just a slim one, to get closer to finding Sarah and uncovering what had happened to her father, she couldn't let it slip away. We'll find him, Lily said, her voice steady, though a rush of adrenaline was coursing through her veins. We have to. As the hours passed, they made their plans. Alexander's contacts were already on the move, tracking down any information they could find about Vincent Hayes. But the deeper they went, the more dangerous the path became. Sarah Brooks wasn't just a businesswoman. She was tied to something far more sinister than anyone had expected. And now, it seemed that her father's disappearance wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning. The next morning, Alexander received an encrypted message on his phone. The lead they'd been waiting for had finally surfaced. Vincent Hayes had been spotted in a small, nondescript town about 4 hours north of the city. It was the first concrete lead they had, and it felt like a turning point. If they could find him, they might finally have a chance to connect the dots. They packed up and left within the hour. The drive was long, the landscape outside the car window a blur of highways and small towns, each one looking more isolated than the last. The further they went, the more Lily's anxiety built. She had come this far, but each mile felt like it was taking her deeper into unknown territory, a territory where she couldn't predict the outcome. When they finally arrived at the town, it was late in the evening. The sun had already set, and the streets were nearly empty, save for a few scattered cars parked along the sidewalks. It wasn't much to look at, just a small, quiet place with old buildings and dim streetlights. But something about the place felt wrong, like it was hiding something beneath its calm exterior. They checked into a local hotel and spent the night preparing for the next day. They didn't know where to begin searching for Vincent, but they had to start somewhere. They had a name, and that was enough to keep them moving forward. The hotel room was small, and the air inside felt stale, but Lily couldn't focus on that. She couldn't focus on anything except the mystery they were about to unravel. The next morning, as they drove through the town, Alexander received another call. His eyes flicked to the screen, his expression unreadable. "We've got him," he said quietly, hanging up the phone. Lily's heart raced. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. They followed the directions to an old house on the edge of town. It was nothing special, just a rundown cottage, overgrown with ivy and surrounded by trees. It looked abandoned, but Lily knew better. This was where Vincent Hayes had been hiding all these years. They parked the car and approached the house cautiously, the air thick with anticipation. Every step they took toward the front door felt like they were walking into a different world, a world that had been hidden from them for far too long. The door creaked when Alexander knocked, and the sound sent a shiver down Lily's spine. For a moment, there was no response. Then, the door slowly opened. Part 8. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway behind it. The smell of dust and stale air hit them immediately, and Lily instinctively wrinkled her nose. The house was far from what she had expected. It wasn't a lavish hideout or a luxurious retreat. It was small, cramped, and faded, as though time had passed it by. The walls were lined with old bookshelves, most of which were empty or filled with yellowing papers and forgotten knickknacks. A man stood in the doorway, his face shadowed by the dim light behind him. He was older than the photos they had seen, his hair graying at the temples, his clothes worn but functional. His eyes, however, were sharp, too sharp. They studied Alexander and Lily with a careful intensity, as if he was weighing their every move, measuring their intentions. "You're looking for me," the man said, his voice low, but there was no trace of surprise in it. It was almost as though he had known they would come. Lily's heart skipped a beat. This was Vincent Hayes, the man who might hold the key to everything. "Are you Vincent Hayes?" she asked, her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline running through her veins. She had been waiting for this moment for days, but now that it was finally here, she wasn't sure what to expect. How would he respond? What would he tell them? He gave a slight nod, his eyes narrowing as he stepped back, gesturing for them to come inside. "Come in," he said simply. "We have a lot to discuss." Lily hesitated for just a second before stepping over the threshold, followed by Alexander. The door closed softly behind them, the quiet of the house swallowing up the sounds of the outside world. They were alone with him now, with the man who could either reveal everything or send them spiraling deeper into a mystery that could consume them both. Vincent led them into a small, cluttered living room, where the only light came from a few flickering lamps placed strategically around the room. He gestured for them to sit on a worn couch, and Lily took a seat, feeling as though she was sinking into the faded cushions. The air was thick with the weight of their purpose. This was it. This was the moment when everything could change. "I know why you're here," Vincent said, settling into an armchair opposite them. His voice had a cold, knowing edge to it. "You want answers about Samuel Turner, and you think I'm the one who can give them to you." Lily felt a lump form in her throat. She had been searching for answers for so long, and now here they were, so close, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth they would uncover wouldn't be anything like she expected. "You know where my father is?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know what happened to him?" Vincent's eyes flicked between her and Alexander, his gaze calculating. "I know a lot more than you think," he replied slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "But it's not the kind of story you want to hear, and it's not the kind of story that will bring you peace. It's a story of betrayal, of power, and of people who've been playing a dangerous game for far too long." Lily's heart raced as she leaned forward. "What happened to him?" she demanded, her voice sharper now. "Where is he? Why did he disappear? Please, tell me. I need to know." "Who?" Vincent leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as if weighing her desperation. He seemed unfazed by her urgency, his calmness unnerving. "I didn't want to get involved with him," Vincent said after a long pause. But Samuel Turner got himself tangled in things he didn't understand. He thought he was smarter than the people he was dealing with, more powerful, more important. But he wasn't. And that's where everything went wrong. Lily's mind was spinning. She didn't understand. What was Vincent talking about? What did Samuel Turner get involved in that was so dangerous? Who was he dealing with? She asked, her voice trembling despite herself. What did he get involved in? Vincent's expression darkened. People who were willing to do anything to protect their interests, he said quietly. People who would kill to keep their secrets buried. And Samuel Turner, your father, was one of those secrets. He knew things. Things that, if they were ever made public, would bring down empires. He had information that could destroy the lives of some very powerful people. Lily's stomach churned. Who were these people? What kind of information did he have? Vincent looked at her, his gaze unreadable. You don't want to know. Trust me. Some things are better left untouched. Some truths are too dangerous to uncover. And 5 has Rain Wade on not Fing. Lily felt a pang of frustration, but there was no turning back now. I have to know, she said, her voice firm. I've been searching for answers for years. I can't go back now. Please just tell me the truth. Vincent sighed, leaning forward in his chair. All right, he said reluctantly. But don't say I didn't warn you. Samuel Turner wasn't just a businessman. He was a pawn in a much bigger game, one involving people who've been pulling strings for decades. These people, let's just call them the consortium, had their fingers in everything. Politics, business, global affairs. They had control over the kind of things that most people couldn't even begin to imagine. And your father, Lily, was going to expose them. Lily's mind was reeling. The consortium? A shadowy group pulling strings in the highest places of power? It sounded like something out of a conspiracy thriller, not her father's life. Yet, here she was, sitting in front of a man who seemed to believe it all. Her father hadn't just disappeared. He had been involved in something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. Why didn't he just tell me? She whispered, more to herself than to anyone in the room. Why did he keep this from me? Vincent didn't answer right away. He looked at her, his expression softening for the first time. Because he didn't want to pull you into it. He didn't want to drag you into a world that could destroy everything you cared about. He thought he could handle it on his own. But he was wrong. Lily's heart sank as the weight of Vincent's words settled over her. Everything she thought she knew, every memory of her father, was being shattered before her eyes. Samuel Turner hadn't just disappeared. He had been silenced. So where is he? She asked, her voice barely audible. Vincent paused, his eyes flicking to the window as if the answer was out there, somewhere beyond the house. I don't know where he is, he said quietly, but I can tell you this. If you want to find him, you'll have to be ready for the consequences. The people who are looking for him are still out there, and they're not done yet. Part 9. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she absorbed Vincent's words. The enormity of what he was telling her hadn't quite settled in yet. Samuel Turner hadn't just disappeared. He had been part of something far darker and more complex. A conspiracy. Powerful people, the kind who controlled the world from the shadows, had been pulling the strings, and her father had become entangled in it. She couldn't process it all at once. It was too much. Everything she thought she knew about her father, about her family, was being called into question. Was the man she had spent so many years searching for really the same person who had played this dangerous game? Had he been a hero, someone trying to bring the truth to light, or just another player in a game that had swallowed him whole? Who are these people? Lily asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. The consortium? What do they want? Vincent didn't immediately answer. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as if considering how much he should reveal. For a moment, the room was thick with silence. Every second stretched out as Lily waited for him to speak. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping in resignation. They're a collection of the most powerful people in the world. Business magnates, politicians, intelligence officials, people who've been shaping the world for decades, but from behind the curtain. They operate in the shadows, moving things around without anyone noticing. And your father, well, he got too close. He knew too much. Lily's mind raced. The consortium. She couldn't help but think of the stories she'd read about powerful organizations, faceless groups manipulating governments and businesses for their own gain. But this wasn't some conspiracy theory. This was real. Her father had been a part of it. Why would they let him walk away? She asked, almost to herself. If he had so much power, why didn't they just eliminate him? Vincent looked at her, his gaze sharp. They thought they could control him. He had a mind of his own, and when they realized they couldn't control him, they decided to make him disappear. But they never stopped looking for him. Lily felt a chill spread through her. They hadn't just let him disappear, they had silenced him. And now, the search for answers was a fight against forces far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "How do you know all of this?" Lily asked, her voice filled with suspicion. "Why are you helping us now? You've been hiding for years. Why come forward now?" Vincent didn't flinch. His face remained calm, but there was an edge to his voice. "I wasn't always hiding. I was part of this. I worked with Samuel, but things went wrong. When he started digging into the consortium's operations, I knew it was only a matter of time before they came for him. I tried to warn him, but by then it was too late. He'd already gotten too deep." Lily absorbed this, her mind spinning. She had never imagined that the man who had once been a part of her father's life, the man who had shared his business, his time, and his trust, was now the one offering to help her. She was torn between gratitude and suspicion. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone? "Do you know where he is now?" she asked again, her voice soft but desperate. Vincent paused, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he wasn't going to answer. But then he spoke, his voice lower than before. "I know where he's been. But where he is now, that's a different story. After the fall, everything changed. People like Samuel don't just disappear. They're either dead or they're hiding, trying to stay out of the way of people who would kill them without a second thought. The question is, do you really want to find him?" Lily looked at him, confused by his words. "Of course I want to find him," she said, her voice rising. "I need to know what happened to him. I need to understand why he disappeared. I need to know the truth." Vincent's eyes softened for a moment, but then he leaned forward, his expression darkening. "Then you need to understand what you're asking for, Lily. The truth about Samuel Turner isn't something you can just brush off. If you go down this path, you're going to open doors you can't close. You'll be digging into a world you don't fully understand. The consortium doesn't just let people walk away. They'll come after you, after everyone you love. They'll do whatever it takes to protect their secrets." Lily's breath caught in her throat as she absorbed his words. This wasn't just about finding her father anymore. It was about exposing a web of corruption and power that could ruin lives, and if she wasn't careful, her own life would be the next to unravel. "I've already come too far," Lily said quietly, her voice filled with determination. "I can't turn back now." Vincent studied her for a moment, and then, slowly, he nodded. "You're right. You've come too far. But if you're going to do this, you need to be ready. Because once you start down this road, there's no going back. The consortium will stop at nothing to protect their interests. And once they know you're onto them, they won't hesitate to destroy everything you've worked for. Everything you love. And Adar." "He were good Adar." Lily swallowed hard, but her resolve remained firm. She couldn't back out now. She had spent too many years searching for answers. Now that the truth was within her grasp, she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. "Then, show me where to start." she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready." Vincent looked at her, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. "All right, but remember what I said. This isn't a game, this is real. And it's going to get ugly." Part 10. The next few days blurred together in a haze of action and uncertainty. Lily's mind was no longer her own. It was consumed by the search for her father, the dangerous game they were playing, and the ever-present shadow of the consortium looming over them. Every decision she made felt like it carried a weight too heavy for her to bear, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't turn back now, not after everything she had learned. The stakes were too high. Vincent had given her a name, a contact from his past, someone who might know the consortium's inner workings. A man named Daniel Garrison. He was an old acquaintance of Samuel Turner's, someone who had worked with him on a few projects before everything had gone south. According to Vincent, Garrison was the key. If anyone could provide them with the information they needed to track down the consortium's secrets, it was him. But the catch was that Daniel Garrison had disappeared years ago, much like Samuel had. No one knew where he was, but Vincent had a lead. A small, inconspicuous town in the middle of nowhere, far from the prying eyes of the world. A place where Garrison had last been seen. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. Lily and Alexander made the decision to go after him, despite the risk. The thought of facing yet another unknown was overwhelming, but they had no choice. They packed their things and set off for the town, determined to track down Garrison and, hopefully, uncover more about the elusive consortium. The drive was long, the landscape outside the window blurring into an endless stretch of highways and small towns. Lily stared out the window, her thoughts racing. She couldn't help but think about the danger they were walking into. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. But she wasn't afraid. She couldn't afford to be. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had a mission, and she was going to see it through, no matter what. As they neared the town, Lily felt a sense of unease settle over her. The place was quiet, too quiet. There were no signs of life, no bustling streets, no people walking around. Just empty streets and houses that seemed abandoned. It felt like a place that had been forgotten by time, a place that people had deliberately chosen to avoid. They pulled into the small motel on the edge of town and checked in. It was run down, the kind of place you wouldn't stop at unless you absolutely had to. But it was all they could afford, and it was the closest place to where Garrison was last seen. "Let's be careful," Alexander said as they headed to their room, his voice low but steady. "We don't know who might be watching. We need to keep a low profile." Lily nodded, but her mind was already elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was an unsettling sensation, like there were eyes on them at every turn. They were no longer just two people searching for answers, they were intruders in a world that didn't want them there. That night, they went over their plan. They would visit the local diner the next morning, the place where Garrison was last seen. They would talk to the people there, see if anyone remembered him, see if anyone knew anything about his whereabouts. It was a small town, and small towns had a way of holding on to secrets. If Garrison had been here, someone would know something. The next morning, they drove to the diner, a shabby little building with peeling paint and faded signs. The smell of coffee and greasy food filled the air as they walked inside. The few patrons that were there didn't pay them much attention, but the waitress behind the counter watched them closely. She was an older woman, her face weathered with age, her eyes sharp and calculating. Lily approached the counter, trying to appear casual as she sat down. "Morning," she said, her voice friendly but cautious. "We're looking for someone, a man named Daniel Garrison. Do you happen to remember him?" The waitress didn't answer immediately. Instead, she wiped down the counter with a rag, her movements slow and deliberate. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper. "You're not the first to ask about him," she said, her eyes flicking around the room. "But I don't know where he is. Haven't seen him in years. Maybe a decade now." Lily leaned forward, her heart racing. "Do you know where he went? What happened to him?" The waitress hesitated. "He was a regular here, back when he worked with the guys from the mines. They'd come in, talk about their business. But that was a long time ago. All I know is he left. No one saw him after that. I don't know what happened to him." Lily's frustration grew. She had expected more, but all she had were vague memories and half-answers. "Do you know if he mentioned anything before he left?" she asked, trying not to sound desperate. "Anything about where he was going, who he was meeting?" The waitress glanced around the diner again, making sure no one was paying too much attention. Then she leaned in slightly. "He was mixed up with some dangerous people," she said quietly. "I don't know what exactly, but there was always talk. People said he was running from something." Lily's mind raced. Dangerous people. The consortium. She could feel the pieces starting to come together, but they were still so far from the truth. "Who was he running from?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The waitress shook her head. "I don't know, but you don't want to find him. If you're looking for him, you need to be careful. Some things are better left in the past." Lily sat back, her mind spinning. She had gotten what little information she could, but it wasn't enough. She needed to know more. She needed to find out what Daniel Garrison knew, and she needed to do it fast. As they left the diner, Alexander turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You heard her. We're not getting any closer to the truth by talking to people here. If we want answers, we'll have to look elsewhere." Lily nodded, her thoughts already racing. The town was full of secrets, and they hadn't even begun to uncover them all. But she couldn't stop now. She was closer than ever to finding her father, and whatever it took, she would finish this. Part 11. The next few days in the small town felt like a never-ending loop of dead ends. Despite their best efforts, every lead they followed seemed to fizzle out. Each door they knocked on left unopened. Lily's patience was starting to wear thin. The more time they spent in this quiet, isolated place, the more she felt like they were being suffocated by the secrecy surrounding it. Every corner they turned, every new name they heard, only seemed to raise more questions without offering any answers. After the encounter at the diner, Alexander had made a few more calls, trying to track down anyone who might know more about Daniel Garrison. But the town was a black hole, a place where secrets were buried deep, and no one wanted to talk about the past. Lily felt like she was losing control. The uncertainty gnawed at her constantly, a persistent ache in her chest. She had been so close to the truth, and now it felt as though the truth was slipping away from her, just beyond her reach. They had to find something. They couldn't leave empty-handed. One afternoon, as they sat in their small motel room, going through old maps and trying to make sense of everything they had learned so far, there was a knock on the door. Lily glanced at Alexander, her brows furrowing in confusion. Who could it be? They hadn't spoken to anyone since the waitress in the diner, and they hadn't made any appointments. She stood up and opened the door cautiously, only to be met by a man who appeared to be in his late 40s. He was dressed casually, wearing a worn jacket and jeans, but his eyes held a sharpness that caught Lily's attention immediately. "You must be Lily," the man said, his voice low but direct. He didn't wait for her to respond before stepping inside, as if he had been expected. Lily stepped back instinctively, her heart racing. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice firm, though she was already sensing that this wasn't an ordinary encounter. The man glanced over his shoulder to make sure no one was following him before turning back to her. "I'm someone who can help you," he said, his tone more cryptic than reassuring. "And I'm someone you should have found a lot sooner." Alexander stood up immediately, his posture defensive, the instinctive move of someone who had been in situations like this before. "Who are you, and how do you know her name?" he demanded, his voice low but commanding. The man raised his hand slightly, signaling that he wasn't there to start trouble. "Relax," he said. "I'm not here to cause any problems. My name's Jack Turner." Lily froze. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment the room seemed to tilt around her. Jack Turner? She had never heard of him before, but the name alone, her father's name, pulled her in immediately. Could he be connected to her father in some way? Turner, she echoed, trying to process the information. Are you related to Samuel Turner? Jack nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I am. Samuel was my brother. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She had never known her father had a brother. The revelation hit her like a punch to the gut. Another part of the mystery that had been hidden from her. Another layer of deception. Another piece of the puzzle that was now unfolding before her. Alexander's gaze flicked between the two of them, his expression skeptical but clearly intrigued. You're Samuel Turner's brother? He asked, his voice low. Then why are you here? Why now? Jack hesitated for a moment, his eyes darkening as he looked away. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, tinged with regret. Because your father isn't just missing. He's gone, Lily. And the people who took him? They're still out there. I've been watching you both, waiting for you to make the connection, and I knew it was only a matter of time before you found me. Lily's pulse quickened. She had so many questions, so many things she needed to understand. What do you mean? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you come to me when I first started looking for him? Her voice cracked with frustration. I've been searching for so long, and now you're telling me that you knew all along? Jack's face hardened at her accusation. It wasn't that simple. Samuel made a choice years ago, and I respected that. I knew he was into something dangerous, but I stayed away. I couldn't risk getting involved. The people he got mixed up with, they don't just leave you alone. They destroy everything in their path. Lily took a step back, trying to process the flood of information. So you knew about the consortium? You knew about all of this? She asked, her voice trembling now. Jack nodded grimly. Yes, I know who they are, and I know what they do. I've been keeping an eye on them for years, but I couldn't get involved. When Samuel disappeared, I was already too deep into hiding. I didn't want to drag you into this, but now, it's too late. They know you're looking for the truth, and they'll stop at nothing to make sure you don't find it. He said. Lily's chest tightened as the reality of the situation sank in, the consortium, her father's disappearance. Everything was tied together in a way she hadn't fully understood until now, and Jack Turner, Samuel's brother, was the one person who could possibly give her the answers she had been desperate for. But there was a price for this knowledge, a price that no one could escape. The truth, Lily was beginning to realize, wasn't just dangerous, it was life-threatening. Jack's eyes softened for a moment as he looked at her. You're in this now, Lily. There's no turning back. But I'll help you. I owe it to Samuel. I owe it to you. He was not a Tenton and of R. Lily swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over her like a heavy cloak. She had already come too far to stop now, but the path ahead was darker, more dangerous than she had ever imagined. I don't have a choice, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. I'm going to find the truth, no matter what it takes. Jack's gaze remained steady, though there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something akin to fear. Then, let's get to work. The clock's ticking, and the longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes. Part 12. The next few days were filled with action, strategy, and a growing sense of urgency. Jack Turner wasn't a man who wasted time, and as much as Lily had questions for him, he was focused on what needed to be done. He had lived in the shadows for years, watching, waiting. But now that Lily had become a part of the equation, everything had changed. The consortium wasn't going to let her search for answers without a fight. Jack had made it clear that if they were going to uncover the truth, they would need to move quickly and carefully. It was a dangerous game they were playing, and Lily knew that every step they took put them further in harm's way. But there was no turning back now. She had already crossed the point of no return. Every new lead, every new piece of information only deepened the mystery, but also fueled her determination. She had to find her father. She had to understand what happened to him and why the world around him had been so carefully concealed. Jack had arranged a meeting with one of his old contacts, someone who had been involved with the consortium years ago and might have some answers. The man's name was Frank Dawson, and he was a former journalist who had investigated high-profile cases that had always seemed to disappear into thin air. The man had become disillusioned with the system and had retreated from the world, but Jack had managed to track him down. Dawson's apartment was in a rundown part of the city, far from the bustling streets Lily was used to. The building was old, with peeling paint and a musty smell that hung in the air. It looked like a place where people went to disappear, a place where the past was buried and forgotten. But Jack had promised that Dawson was their best shot at uncovering the consortium's secrets. Lily stood in front of the building, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. This could be the breakthrough they needed, or it could be another dead end. She glanced over at Jack, who was already walking toward the entrance without looking back. There was no time for hesitation. The world they were stepping into was one of hidden truths and dangerous lies, but Lily had no choice but to follow. Inside Dawson's apartment, the air was thick with the scent of old books and cigarette smoke. The walls were lined with shelves filled with newspapers, files, and photographs, all carefully organized. Though it was clear that this was no ordinary journalist's archive. There were articles, sure, but there were also pieces of a larger puzzle documents that seemed to point toward something much darker. Dawson was sitting in a worn armchair, a half-empty glass of whiskey beside him. He looked like a man who had seen too much, a man who had been fighting battles in the dark for far too long. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face was weathered, but there was an unmistakable sharpness in them as he looked up at Jack and Lily. "You're looking for answers," Dawson said before either of them could speak, his voice gravelly but clear. "I know what you're looking for, and I know who you're up against." Lily stepped forward, her pulse quickening. "You know about the consortium?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You know what happened to my father?" Dawson leaned back in his chair, his eyes flicking to the window before he answered. "I know more than you think," he said slowly. "Your father wasn't just involved with them, he was a threat to them. He had information that could bring them all down. But the people who control the consortium, they don't let threats live. They do whatever it takes to bury the truth." Lily felt a chill run down her spine. "So, they killed him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dawson didn't answer immediately. He took a long sip of his drink, his gaze distant as though reliving memories he had long tried to forget. When he finally spoke, it was with the quiet weight of someone who had seen too much. "They didn't kill him, at least not in the way you think," he said, his voice low and steady. "Your father is still alive, Lily, but they made sure he disappeared. They erased him from the world, left him with nothing but the knowledge of the very thing that could destroy them." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "You're saying he's alive?" She couldn't believe it. All this time she had thought he was gone, that the mystery of his disappearance was unsolvable. But now, Dawson was telling her that he was still out there somewhere. Dawson nodded, his eyes darkening. "I don't know where he is, but I know he's alive. And I know that whoever is hiding him has made sure that no one can find him. The consortium has the resources to make people disappear, but they also have the resources to keep them hidden. They've been watching you, Lily. They know what you're trying to do." Lily's mind raced as the implications of Dawson's words settled in. If her father was still alive, then there was still hope. But the danger had just escalated. If the consortium was actively trying to keep him hidden, then they wouldn't hesitate to stop anyone who came too close, and she had already crossed that line. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "How do we find him?" Dawson leaned forward, his gaze steady as he met her eyes. "We start with what we know." We follow the threads, even the ones that seem insignificant. The consortium's power is vast, but they're not invincible. And once we get close enough, we can expose them. But it's going to take everything we have and more. Lily looked at Jack, her heart heavy with the weight of everything they had learned. She had come so far, but now it felt like the real battle was just beginning. The consortium was no longer just a shadowy organization, they were her enemies, and they were willing to do anything to stop her. But Lily wasn't afraid. She had made a promise to herself, to her father, and to the truth. She would find him, no matter the cost. "We'll do whatever it takes," Lily said, her voice filled with determination. "We're going after them." Dawson gave a slow nod, his expression grim. "Then we're already in too deep." Part 13. The revelation that her father was still alive hit Lily harder than she expected. For years, she had lived with the belief that her father's disappearance was a mystery that would never be solved. She had grieved him, in her own way, even though she didn't fully understand the circumstances of his absence. But now, knowing that he was out there, somewhere, trapped in the clutches of a powerful organization, was both a relief and a curse. On one hand, it meant that there was still hope that her father could still be found. On the other hand, it meant that the consortium, the very people who had hidden him, were actively preventing her from finding him. The game had changed. It was no longer just about uncovering a past. It was about survival. They couldn't stay in the small town for much longer. The longer they remained, the more dangerous it would be. They had to move quickly, find new leads, and stay ahead of the consortium's watchful eyes. Jack was already making plans, reaching out to old contacts in the underworld who might have information about the consortium's operations. They were going to have to dig deeper than they ever had before. Every move they made from now on would have to be calculated. They couldn't afford mistakes. Lily and Alexander spent the next few days in constant motion. They barely had time to breathe, let alone sleep. Every time they thought they had a lead, it fizzled out. It became apparent just how deeply the consortium's influence reached. People were afraid to talk, afraid of what might happen if they got too close to the truth. Even Jack, who had been hiding in the shadows for years, seemed to feel the weight of the danger closing in around them. But Lily couldn't stop. She wouldn't. The thought of her father, alive but hidden, trapped by people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, kept her moving. She had come too far to give up now. It was on the 5th day after their meeting with Dawson that they finally got the break they needed. Jack had managed to track down a former associate of Sarah Brooks, someone who had worked closely with her in the past. This person, a man named Robert Hall, had once been involved in one of the consortium's most secretive operations. He had disappeared from the public eye years ago, but Jack's network had finally tracked him down to a remote cabin in the woods, miles from any major city. "Robert Hall knows everything," Jack had said, his voice grim. "He was part of the inner circle. If anyone can tell us where your father is, it's him." Lily's heart raced as they prepared for the journey. They had no time to waste, but there was an undeniable sense of dread hanging over them. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. And yet, Lily knew there was no turning back now. The truth was within reach, and she would do whatever it took to find it. They arrived at the cabin late in the evening, the sky already darkening as the sun dipped below the horizon. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by tall trees and the stillness of the forest. It felt like they were stepping into a different world, one that had been untouched by time, where secrets were hidden, buried deep beneath the surface. As they approached the cabin, the door opened, and a man stepped out into the dim light. He was older than the photos Jack had shown them, but there was no mistaking his identity. Robert Hall. His face was lined with age and regret, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that suggested he knew exactly what they were here for. "You're looking for me," Robert said, his voice low but steady. "I don't know what you think you're going to find, but you're about to open a door that can't be closed again." Lily felt a chill crawl down her spine. "We're here for answers," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "We need to know what happened to my father. We need to know everything." Robert studied her for a long moment, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for something. Finally, he sighed, stepping aside to let them in. "I've been waiting for this," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "I knew it was only a matter of time before someone came asking the questions no one wants answered." Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and tobacco. It felt like a place where time had stopped, where people came to hide, to escape, to forget. Robert sat down at a rickety table, motioning for them to take a seat across from him. "Your father was a good man, Lily," he began, his voice quiet, almost regretful. "But he was in over his head. The consortium. They have a way of making sure people stay in line. They have a lot of power, a lot of resources. When Samuel started digging into their business, he became a liability. They don't like people who know too much. They'll kill anyone who threatens their empire." Lily leaned forward. Her eyes locked on Robert's. "So you're saying they killed him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "They took him from me?" Robert shook his head. "No. They didn't kill him. They made sure he disappeared. They erased him. But they never let him go. Not really. They kept him hidden, away from the world, and they kept him quiet. The truth about your father, about what he knew, it's buried somewhere no one can reach. But if you're looking for him, you have to understand one thing. They'll never stop looking for you. They'll do whatever it takes to keep you from finding the truth." Lily's breath caught in her throat. "Where is he?" she demanded. "Where is my father?" Robert's eyes darkened. "I don't know. But I know who does. And if you want to find him, you'll have to go to the one person who's still holding the key to his location." End quote. Lily felt a wave of frustration wash over her. "Who?" she asked, desperate for an answer. "Who has the key?" Robert leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah Brooks." Part 14. The name Sarah Brooks echoed in Lily's mind like a drumbeat. It was a name she had heard before, mentioned in passing, but never truly understood. Now, it seemed like Sarah was at the heart of everything. She wasn't just an enigma from her father's past, she was the key to finding him. Lily's thoughts raced as she processed Robert Hall's words. Sarah Brooks was still out there, and if she held the answers to where her father had been hidden, then Sarah was the next person they needed to find. But there was something else in Robert's words, something that Lily couldn't ignore. If the consortium had gone to such lengths to erase her father, then Sarah Brooks had to be involved in something just as dangerous. "I've spent years trying to stay off their radar," Robert continued, his voice low. "But Sarah, she's a different story. She's been in and out of the game for too long, and I've seen what she's capable of. She's the one who could unravel it all if she wanted to." Lily leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Robert. "Where do we find her?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor of anticipation that pulsed through her veins. "How do we get to her?" "A-D-I-do, ride, nar." Robert hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to the door as if checking for anyone who might be listening. Then, he spoke in a low, urgent tone. "She's tied to a lot of different people, powerful people, but there's one place she always goes back to, the last place she was seen before everything went dark. It's a safe house. A small building in the city. It's off the grid. No one knows about it except the people she trusts. But it's the only lead you've got." Lily's heart raced. A safe house. It was a lead, but it felt like the kind of place that would be almost impossible to find. But she had come this far. There was no way she was stopping now. "How do we get in?" she asked, already formulating a plan in her mind. Robert's eyes darkened, and he leaned in closer. "You don't just get in," he warned. "This isn't some abandoned house you can break into. This place is locked down tight, but there's someone who can help you get past the security. I've got a contact, someone who used to work with Sarah. They can help you get access. But it's not going to be easy. Lily nodded, her mind already working through the logistics. We don't have time to waste, she said firmly. We need to find her, now. Alexander, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. If Sarah's the key, then we need to prepare for whatever comes next. We know the consortium won't sit back and let us dig into their secrets. They'll fight back. And we need to be ready. Lily turned to him, meeting his gaze. I'm ready, she said, her voice filled with a steely resolve. I've been ready for a long time. Robert's gaze flicked to both of them, his face hardening. You don't understand what you're walking into, he said, his voice low but urgent. You're talking about going up against the most powerful people in the world. These aren't just businessmen, they're shadowy figures who can make people disappear without a trace. If you want the truth, you're going to have to pay a price. And the cost might be more than you're willing to pay. Here. Lily took a deep breath. She had heard the warnings before, but it was different now. She had seen the risks, and she had come to terms with the consequences. The truth was out there, and no one was going to stop her from finding it. We'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice unwavering. Robert nodded slowly, his expression hardening. All right, then you're going to need this, he said, reaching into a drawer and pulling out a small, unmarked envelope. He handed it to Lily. This is the key to finding Sarah. But remember, once you open that door, there's no going back. Lily took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she felt the weight of it in her hand. Inside, she knew, would be the final piece of the puzzle. The moment she opened it, everything would change. But she was ready. She had to be. We'll be ready, she said again, her voice steady and resolute. With that, Robert stood up and walked to the door, but before he left, he turned back to them. I don't know if you'll find your father, he said, his voice softer now. But I hope you do. Just remember there are people out there who will do anything to keep you from finding the truth, so watch your backs. Lily nodded, her gaze focused on the envelope in her hands. She could feel the weight of his words in her chest. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except finding her father and uncovering the truth. The consortium had taken too much from her, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. The night was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps as Lily and Alexander stood in front of a nondescript building in the heart of the city. It was smaller than she had expected, tucked away between two towering structures, almost hidden from view. But this was the place where they would finally confront Sarah Brooks, the person who held the key to everything. The safe house was their last shot, the final piece of the puzzle that could lead them to her father. Lily's heart raced as they approached the door. She could feel the weight of the envelope in her jacket pocket, the key to everything they had been working for. It had come down to this moment, the culmination of everything they had endured, every obstacle they had overcome. If they succeeded tonight, they would finally uncover the truth about her father's disappearance. But if they failed, she pushed the thought out of her mind. She couldn't afford to think about failure. Not now. Not when she was so close. This is it, Alexander said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. His voice was tense, but there was a resolve in his eyes that mirrored her own. We don't know what's on the other side of that door, Lily. We have to be ready for anything. I know, Lily replied, her voice steady. She wasn't afraid, at least, not anymore. The fear had long since faded, replaced by a determination that burned hotter with every passing minute. We're not leaving without answers. They approached the door and stopped in front of it. Lily could feel her pulse pounding in her ears as she took out the envelope. She carefully opened it, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out a small key card. It looked ordinary, but Lily knew it was anything but. This card would grant them access to Sarah's world, the place where all the answers they had been searching for lay. Without hesitation, Lily inserted the card into the slot on the door and the heavy lock clicked open. The door swung inward with a soft creak, revealing a dimly lit hallway beyond. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of antiseptic, a stark contrast to the stale air of the outside world. It was the kind of sterile environment that made Lily uneasy, but there was no turning back now. They stepped inside, and the door clicked shut behind them. The hallway stretched before them, empty and quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Lily's eyes scanned every inch of the space, every corner, every shadow. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Sarah Brooks might have been hiding in plain sight, but Lily knew she wouldn't make it easy for them to find her. They moved cautiously down the hall, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath their feet. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the walls themselves were closing in around them. Every turn felt like they were getting closer, but at the same time further away from the answers they sought. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hallway. This one was different, heavier, reinforced, as if it was meant to keep people out. But Lily wasn't stopping now. She had come too far. She glanced at Alexander, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. Together, they pushed open the door, revealing a large, dimly lit room. At the far end, seated at a desk, was Sarah Brooks. She looked up as they entered, her piercing gaze meeting Lily's. There was no surprise in her eyes, just a quiet, knowing calm, as if she had been expecting them all along. "Lily," Sarah said, her voice smooth, controlled. "I knew you would come. You've been looking for answers, haven't you? But you're too late." Lily's chest tightened at the words. She had never heard Sarah's voice before, but now that she did, it sounded just as cold as she had imagined. "Where's my father?" she demanded, stepping forward, her voice steady despite the burning anger inside her. "Tell me what happened to him. I want the truth." Sarah didn't immediately respond. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the surface of the desk. "The truth?" she said with a slight smirk. "You think you can handle the truth, Lily? You think you're ready to know everything?" Lily didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." Sarah's smirk faded, replaced by an expression of cold calculation. "Your father wasn't just any man. He knew things that would have torn the consortium apart. They couldn't afford to let him live with that knowledge, but they couldn't kill him either. So they made him disappear. And now, so will you." Lily's heart skipped a beat as she took a step back. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "You're lying. My father's alive. You know where he is. Tell me." Sarah stood up slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You really don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice growing colder. "You're not supposed to find him. You're not supposed to be here. This was never meant for you, Lily." Before Lily could respond, Sarah reached into a drawer in her desk and pulled out a small, silver device. With a single press of a button, the lights in the room flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Lily's heart raced as she struggled to see anything in the pitch black. She could hear the faint hum of machinery, but nothing else. Her pulse quickened as she realized something was wrong. The room felt too still, too silent. Suddenly, a loud noise erupted from the corner of the room like metal scraping against metal. Lily turned toward the sound, her breath catching in her throat. The walls around them began to shift, sliding open to reveal a hidden passageway. The air grew colder, and Lily realized with growing horror that the passage wasn't meant for escape, it was meant to trap them,